cracking, everyone? Hello and welcome to Rogue Refinery, the show where innovation and creativity reign supreme as we build around some of the coolest cards in Magic. I'm AliasV, joined as always by Paul Cheon and the wonderful bunch from the Faithless Brewing podcast. Last week we gave the boys the task of building around Vivien, Monsters Advocate. Let's find out how the guys did. Dan, standard, what was your record? What did you play?
Yeah, I decided to try out Vivien in a Teamer Elemental shell. I took this through 5 matches and I got a 3-2 record. So not great, but it was an all right deck.
Not too shabby. David, how'd you do?
Good. I played a mono green Planeswalker Vivien deck, which included the Heliod Ballista combo, and I played that to a 4-1 record.
Mono green. I see what you did there. And Damon, how'd you do in Modern?
We have to put some asterisks next to these results, but I got a 4-1, 3-2, 4-1, 3-2 with a Urian Soulherder deck featuring Vivien. That felt pretty powerful at his high, but obviously it's now 3 CMC away from his former greatness.
Yeah, there might need to be some adjustments for this one.
Yeah. We'll find out more about those 4-1 runs in Modern and Pioneer a little bit later, but for now, the focus is all about Standard and Dan the Man. So tell us, Dan, how did Vivien Monsters Advocate feel for you in the Standard deck? Because you were pretty excited about it last week, so still feeling pretty good about it, or...?
Well, a lot can change in a week, as we've seen, Ali. So it took me quite a few tries to find a suitable home for Vivien in Standard. When I looked at the card, going through Vivien's abilities, it seemed like they're all focused around creatures in different ways. So she has a powerful static that lets you cast creatures off the top of your deck. She also has a -2 that lets you find a specific creature out of your deck, and then the +1 that can generate tokens. So what I was looking for was a deck that A, already had a lot of creatures, but B, really could make something really special out of the -2 ability. So I'm looking for actually pairs of creatures that when used in conjunction, like little duos, 1-2 punches, so that on any turn when I can -2 Vivien, I can potentially have a really explosive combination of creatures added to my board.
Yeah, I mean, so speaking of those kind of additional creatures that you can play off of the Vivien, I mean, you have a couple of really fun one-ofs as a result in your deck, right? I mean, I'm looking at Thassa Deep Dwelling and also the 1 copy of Ravager Worm. How much work did those one-ofs do in your deck?
Yeah, well, they're one-ofs in what is an 80-card deck, so yes, this was a Urian build. But the beauty of Vivien is that you have them basically on call whenever the game situation calls for it, and I did get quite a lot of good use out of Ravager Worm and Thassa as well. So the shell, as I mentioned, is a basic Teamer Elemental shell, but what that means is that you're leaning heavily on cards like Risen Reef, on Omnath, Locus of Rage, even Cavalier of Thorns that will trigger every time an Elemental enters the battlefield. So Thassa really leans into that plan. With the -2 ability of Vivien, you can cast Thassa, go find the Risen Reef, that'll come into play first. Thassa comes down, go to your end step, blink the Risen Reef, and you're getting potentially a bunch of triggers in one turn. The Thassa also played really well with the top end, which is Agent of Treachery. This is kind of your end game. Once you've gotten all this value, generated all these triggers off your Risen Reef and your Omnath, drawn all the cards, you want Agent to just sort of clean things up, and having access to a Thassa can really slam the door shut on your opponents.
Agent of Treachery has been proven time and time again that it is just an absolute game ender. If you hit that before your opponent has any answer for it, it's pretty much game over. So yeah, and good thing you're playing 80 cards too, because with all the stuff you're stealing, you shouldn't have any chance of decking yourself, hopefully. But Risen Reef plus that, gonna get close. I
mean, I came pretty close. Cavalier of Thorns will take 5 cards every time it comes into play, and with access to Urian and Thassa, you're potentially getting a lot of triggers. I got well under 20 cards in several of my matches.
I wanted to ask both of you a question. Like we haven't spoken too much about Vivien, but how do you feel she fits into the decks in Standard? Because she's a 5-mana Planeswalker, but we see incredibly powerful Planeswalkers already in that slot. So does she have a space? Did it feel a little awkward? Would you rather have had something there? Like what were the challenges with the card?
So green decks have not been doing super well in Standard lately. We've talked about Nissa Who Makes the World as a card that used to dominate Standard and has even fallen off lately. Vivien has the same mana cost, and I found Vivien faced similar challenges. It was actually tough going for a lot of my testing process. Vivien is a very mana-hungry card, so you're really incentivized to have a lot of stuff that you can do on the turn when you untap with her. But at that point, once you're filling your deck with all these ramp spells, it's kind of like, why stop at Vivien? She's only as good as the creatures she finds. So I found myself often in these arms races where everyone's trying to speed up, get more and more mana in play. And if I sort of stopped at Vivien as my big payoff card, I felt like actually wasn't going as big as my opponents were, whether they were just killing my Vivien with Elspeth Conqueror's Death, or whether they were ramping all the way up to Agent of Treacheries of their own. I lost quite a few games to my own Viviens.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Vivien is one of those types of cards where maybe in a metagame where it's a little more mid-range focused, maybe it's it's a little bit quicker. It's important to actually have a 3/3 body on the battlefield. That's where maybe it might shine. But right now, with everybody just trying to slam as many Agent of Treacheries into play as possible, it seems like just maybe in terms of power level, she might just not get the job done.
Yeah, she's kind of stuck in the middle. And I think you said at mid-range, if we get to a mid-range format where games are actually slowing down and it's more about resource denial, if it's a Thought Erasure, Murderous Rider kind of format where people are just trying to stick one last in is great when she's the last threat because just a couple turns in play, she'll pull you way ahead. But that's not a lot of the matches in Standard right now. Granted, I was testing when Jeskai Luca Fires was still a scourge of the format, so I do think that actually she'll perform better in the new Fires free metagame. But on the whole, I think that there's some tricky challenges just by virtue of being a 5-mana Planeswalker that needs to stick around for several turns to do her thing.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan. Appreciate the valiant effort with Vivien, Monsters Advocates. Now, Paul, what Dan was saying about Vivien kind of being like stuck in the middle, it's not as insanely good as some of the other 5-mana Planeswalkers, and it doesn't have as much of an impact on the battlefield as it enters. It can protect itself, which is good. I mean, the mark of most good Planeswalkers is, okay, cool. When it lands, can it protect itself? We've got Teferi bouncing things. We've got Nissa making a hasty, vigilant land. We've got, I don't know, Sarkhan making dragons. Not that we see Sarkhan anymore, but what do you think Vivien would need to be like, okay, yes, auto-include in every single deck?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it will also just depend on how the format shakes out after these recent bannings. But I think, honestly, I mean, you just mentioned it. Another 5-mana Planeswalker that exists in Standard, that's green. And I believe it's probably just the superior option to have if you're trying to ramp into Planeswalkers. And that's Nissa Who Shakes the World. As long as Nissa Who Shakes the World is in the format, she also makes a 3/3. But guess what happens? When you get to untap a Nissa Who Shakes the World, you get all the mana in the world and you can go over the top. And right now, that's what everybody's trying to do. Again, the metagame might shift, might change with the banning of Fire's Invention, with the changing of the Battle Companion's work. But for the time being, at least going into, when Dan tested this deck, I mean, the metagame was just all Agent of Treacheries and all people trying to go over the top of each other. And in that environment, this is just not what you want to be doing, probably.
Next up, we're going to chat to David about Pioneer and his mono green Planeswalker list. All right, do tell. Why the inverted commas?
So in the days before Ikoria, Aspiring Spike, who is a wonderful streamer and deck designer, people should definitely check him out. He had built this mono green Planeswalker list that was actually mono green. And it played 4 of Vivien Arcbow Ranger, 4 of Karn the Great Creator, and 4 Nissa. So what I did was port most of that shell. I replaced the Nissas just straight up with Vivien Monsters Advocate. I made a couple other tweaks. And one of the things I did is add just enough of a white splash to play a 1 of Heliod Suncrown. And that interacts very positively with Walking Ballista and the -2 of Vivien Monsters Advocate.
Could you talk to us about kind of that combo of Walking Ballista plus Heliod? And, just thinking about it myself, that interaction doesn't exactly work with Vivien in the way that you would want if you want the Walking Ballista, right?
Right. So we're playing 3 Walking Ballista in our main deck, and we're also playing 4 Karn and 3 Vivien Arcbow Ranger, and they can, all 7 of them, assuming you've plussed your 4 mana Vivien, can tutor for the 1 of Walking Ballista in your sideboard. So Dan was talking about, okay, you need to have these like value chains with Vivien Monsters Advocate. I found that Pioneer is just way too cutthroat for that. We can't be, I got a 3-for-1 here. It's like, you're dead the next turn. So when you're playing your 5-mana Planeswalker, the hope is to untap and kill. So the way you do that is you -2 your Vivien, and then you cast your Walking Ballista for X = 2. That's a total CC of 4 mana. That lets you tutor up any 3 mana or less card in your deck, and that is your 1 of Heliod. And then if you have 2 mana left, which would be hopefully a 1 and a white, and you have 7 white sources plus 4 Sylvan Caryatids, you just give your Walking Ballista lifelink, and you go to town on your opponent. I think people are familiar with the Ballista Heliod combo. Mono white plays it as well. So you have this sort of like ramp shell and these like value Planeswalkers that can win the game, and then you also have this kind of, I don't want to call it a backdoor because it happens quite frequently. You just have this way to just sort of oops, I win once you have a Vivien in play for a turn.
All right. Well, I have a question here with kind of your choice of the 4-mana Planeswalkers, right? You have, 11 Planeswalkers in your deck, and, Vivien is a card that you can use to get creatures, and so is Karn. How important was it to have this much redundancy in, having ways to find your Walking Ballista? Is it super important to have those extra Planeswalkers, or is it other important things in your sideboard that you really felt like you needed to get?
Yeah, so Karn, very famously the mono green Planeswalker, you just hit submit again, game 2 and game 3. You don't have to sideboard at all. What that means is Karn gives you access to all these cards that help you beat a lot of these combo decks. Post Theros, really, Pioneer is a very combo-oriented, even the fair decks, like Inverter or Mono White, those functionally kill you with combos. So being able to tutor up the Walking Ballista is very relevant, but being able to tutor up Grafdigger's Cage, against Ruda, Tormod's Crypt against graveyard decks, Pithing Needle against other opponents like Heliod's or Walking Ballista. Karn just lets you do it all. I've tutored up Great Henge. That's just kind of shuts the door against aggro decks. Also, Karn turns Great Henge into a creature if you need to bring the beat down the next turn.
Get him for 9.
So yeah.
Nice.
And the key piece, you don't think of it as being that powerful, is God Pharaoh statue. It just makes it so hard for combo decks to actually cast all their spells. And if you can do it against a low enough mana count aggro deck, the game is just over. They just can't cast enough spells to compete with what you're doing. And then again, Karn can animate God Pharaoh statue.
Oh my goodness.
Vivien Arcbow Ranger interacts very positively with the Walking Ballistas you want to play anyway. They're part of your combo, but now it's just your fair plan is very powerful. Adding 2 +1/+1 counters to Walking Ballista every turn is just so hard for other fair decks to beat. And then once you've plussed her onto Walking Ballista, the next turn, if they tap out or whatever to flood the board, you just minus her. You have your 1 Heliod in the sideboard. So if you have 5 mana, you can do it like sort of backdoor way. If you already have a Walking Ballista in play with 2 or 3 counters, you -5 your Vivien. You don't get Ulamog or whatever like the one used to because you don't have the crazy mana like Nissa. You get your Heliod, you give lifelink to your Walking Ballista, and you win.
So you went 4-1. What was your one loss to, and what went wrong?
I lost to Blue-Black Inverter, the 60-card version, played by Austin Yost, who is kind of a famous SCG grinder, very wonderful player. Kept some kind of sketchy hands, and you really need to get a fast draw, but then it's always tough against these Thoughtseize decks. Do you want to mulligan a playable hand that doesn't have a 1 or 2 mana accelerator? Or what if it's a bad hand with a 1 mana accelerator? Do you keep it? It might get Fatal Push or Thoughtseize. So in game 1, he Thoughtseize my 1 mana creature before I got to take my first turn. And in the second game, I just didn't quite draw enough aggression to kill him before he comboed me out.
Yeah, typically, traditionally, just these mono green decks, they're pretty good at putting pressure on the battlefield and killing your opponents by turn 4, turn 5, maybe if you get the ideal draw. But, the one thing that it does typically tend to lack is interaction, right? So it seems to me that the decks that are really trying to do specific linear things might be the matchups that you struggle with, and that's probably where your 4-mana Planeswalkers really shine.
Exactly. And I do really want to emphasize Karn being able to fetch Glass Casket is so relevant. Like the white splash just matters a lot. Being able to Glass Casket and Ensouled Indestructible Land is just such a blowout. It's the kind of thing exactly like you're talking about, Paul. You're playing these mono green ramp decks. That's the kind of card that really would give you trouble normally, unless you could cast Ulamog or something. This lets you get underneath that, and all of a sudden, Karn is not just it's shutting down opponents' artifacts because that blue, white, and soul deck is kind of everywhere. I think it's won a Pioneer Challenge. Sam Pardee won the challenge with it, and a lot of people have been having success. So Karn's just passive. We're aware of that in Modern as being powerful. It's actually very good in Pioneer now, and being able to fetch up this cheap removal spell is really relevant.
All right, so the card that we tossed you with building around, Vivien Monster's Advocate, how do you think it performed in the 5-mana slot as opposed to a Nissa Who Shakes the World, for example?
Yeah, so, they're very similar mana costs, and like Paul was saying, they kind of do the same thing. They make a 3/3 on the turn they come into play. It's what happens when they untap. So I think that Nissa was probably better when Pioneer was a little more fair. The fact that you accrue all this advantage and you have all this mana to spend every turn is actually pretty relevant, especially when you have Karn, which is kind of drawing a card with its -2, and you've got all this mana to spend on it. But being able to just win the next turn mattered a lot. These Lurrus decks are very aggressive, and you don't have a lot of time to manifest that advantage that Nissa would give you with all that extra mana. And these Inverter decks and Mono White decks, they're threatening to kill you, very quickly as well. This is a deck that already I was having success with without playing a companion at all. If other decks are going to get slightly weaker because the companion requirement is 3 extra mana, it's possible that this will get even better. It's possible that the metagame shifts in such a way that maybe the matchups that are bad for this deck become more prevalent. I'm not exactly sure what those would be, but yeah, you're not harmed at all by this BNR announcement, and you may be significantly benefited because these other decks are losing their Urian or whatever.
I mean, kudos to you for already coming prepared for this announcement. Just already foreseeing it into existence and playing a deck that just didn't have a companion in it, because I think over half the decks right now being played have companions in it, and you somehow found a way to have success with a deck that didn't have a companion in a world of companion.
I think it's 70% of decks were playing companions in Pioneer, 50% were playing Urian or something. But yeah, you just it's like when you run up a hill, sometimes you just want to put 50 pounds on your back and just really challenge yourself.
Just turn on hard mode. Just turn on hard mode and hope
extra hard mode on Madden. Yeah.
Would have been 5-0 if I had a companion, but you know what? It's okay. I'll take the 4-1.
Alrighty, well, thanks so much, David. Very successful outing there with your mono green Planeswalkers. I like it a lot. And yeah, Paul, like David said, chances are it's just going to get better. Like, that combo seems pretty damn good. I mean, Heliod just going to ping you a bunch, gain a bunch of counters, gain a bunch of life, and just, oops, you're dead.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just kind of look at this is a deck that also had some amount of success in Standard, where you have some mana creatures, you're ramping up to Vivien. If Vivien's on the board and you just have creatures in play, you just kill your opponent, right? You can just beat your opponent down, and that plan is very, very strong. But then all of a sudden, you have this other angle where you're like, oh, by the way, I'm going to fetch some cards to completely hose your strategy, or I'm going to just kill you with my combo. The fact that this deck can just pivot and do both things, I think that's what makes this deck a powerful option.
Yeah, one thing, green isn't very good at drawing cards, and just being able to tutor out exactly what you need with this list, it just makes it that much more, reliable and consistent. So, yeah, looks like a fun one to give a go with in the Pioneer Leagues. But we're not done yet, friends. So we're going to shift gears now to Modern and welcome Damon to the table as we discuss what shenanigans he got up to. Welcome, Damon. So, do tell, how did you fare in Modern with Vivien, Monster's Advocate?
So first I decided to build some sort of Naya value Primeval Titan deck, and I had the worst league I've ever played in Magic. It was very quick, very painless almost.
But let me guess, our Boil Grazer was MVP, right?
There were no MVPs. It was all losers.
Okay.
Lots of LVPs.
0-5-0-10. But yeah, so Dan recommended I try Vivien in a Soul Herder shell, and their 80-card Urian list. And I was like, okay, I can squeeze these in. The deck plays Court of Calling. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure she could play a role. And I was super impressed with how Vivien worked. But what is this deck? So first off, this is a Soul Herder deck popularized ever since Modern Horizons came out, featuring Soul Herder. And the goal of the deck is just play Icefang Coatls, Wall of Blossoms, Eternal Witness, Soul Herder, and then you start ephemerating your things. You start Soul Herder flickering. You just start drawing multiple cards a turn. And somehow this weird 1/1 creatures just add up and they eventually overcome your opponent, or maybe you get killed along the way. And so that's the goal. And so then with Court of Calling and Vivien, you have room to play a bunch of kind of one-ofs as a toolbox. So what was interesting was that Vivien looked like this kind of, weird card in this deck, just hanging out. But it turns out that you play Vivien on maybe turn 4 with the Birds of Paradise. You uptick, you make a 3/3. The Beast is fine. I never get the right token. I'm like, Vigilance, like, wait, I really need to reach, or vice versa. Every single time I got it wrong. It's fine. But then, it just kind of wins the game next turn in a way that is similar to almost like Primeval Titan, a card I play a lot otherwise in these sorts of decks. And that's because you do the following thing the next turn. You go Vivien downtick, cast Urian out of your companion zone, Vivien triggers, and then you find probably Avalanche Riders, kill their land, Urian resolves, exile Avalanche Riders, exile Vivien, exile any other Coatls, whatever you have lying around. They all come back. Avalanche Riders comes back, kills another land. If you have another Ephemerate, it just goes all their lands go away. And you can also sub out Avalanche Riders for example, Venser, just bounce their whole board, or anything else that really, situation calls for. But that line alone usually puts the game away.
Oh my goodness.
It's pretty hard to lose at that point, unless you're already, really struggling.
I was about to say, what could go wrong after that? You just basically go, whoops, all your things are gone.
Yeah, so it looks like you took kind of that Bant value ETB shell and decided to make it a whole lot more fun for your opponent by adding the land destruction element. With Avalanche Riders. But, one other thing that you can do with Vivien is, of course, use that minus ability to search out a bunch of different fun one-ofs, right? Because, Dan already alluded to it before, but now you're playing, 80 cards with a much bigger card pool. There's a lot of really cool options that you can play here, but there's one option that probably not going to be seeing play anymore. I see in here in your deck one copy of Draneth Magistrate.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I actually started going up to 2 or 3 copies. Probably 2 is the right number to have in the end. But yeah, I'm actually going to have to pull up my notes on this one just to describe exactly what this card does. But first off, it shuts off companions, although I guess the way this changes is that...
don't think that works anymore.
Sorry.
Oh, well. But here's the thing. So let me just list a couple cards. These are fringe cards in the Modern. I'm not sure if you guys really have seen them in too many Tier 1 decks. But going through the list, we have Lotus Bloom, Urza, Emery, Uro, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Snapcaster Mage, Light Up the Stage, Clink to Dust, Mystic Forge, Oxyvagonist, Conflagrate, and even Vivien Monsters Advocate Static.
Yeah, okay.
These all cards all get, can't cast those.
It still does things. He got knocked down a peg or two, but he still does things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You get these game states where all of a sudden it becomes a kind of protect the magistrate type of thing, where you just try to keep up like Resto or Ephemerate at all times.
Yeah, must keep Matthias Leverato safe. Every time I see this card, I'm just like, yep, that's Matthias. Vivien seems to be a pretty key piece in this deck, because otherwise, if you're just drawing a bunch of one-ofs, it's like, it's a little bit awkward, right? So just having her, she keeps all the plans together, right? She's the glue, if you could call her that.
She's kind of the hammer.
The hammer.
The Urian line is just big. Like,
yeah,
it takes over.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
And then you just do it again the next turn with probably not Urian again, but maybe you have a Restoration Angel and you go fetch something else. Flicker the Avalanche Riders that are still lying around.
Oh yeah, so I got to play with the Avalanche Riders, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I ETB, and then I just blow up a land. Oh wait, I can do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and again. Oh, and again. And then all of a sudden, my mind just went, I get the deck. It was fun. I felt a little dirty afterwards, but it was fun.
So was that typically the most common way that you kind of put away your opponents, where your opponents would just be like, okay, I don't want to play Magic anymore because you killed all of my lands? Because that's what it seems like to me. I mean, I'm just looking at this, you're playing a bunch of 1/1s, drawing a few cards here and there, but if you ever draw Avalanche Riders, right? If you ever draw Avalanche Riders or find Avalanche Riders, Ephemerate Avalanche Riders, it just seems like it just causes such a huge headache for your opponent.
Yeah, there's the Angel 2 that just like, whoop, out you go, back you come, boom.
Yeah, in a more fair Modern, I would maybe feel like a slightly bad person for doing this, but when you're up against like Amulet Titan, Tron, Eldrazi Tron, like just nuke all those lands. They gotta go. I feel no shame.
Oh, I totally agree. Anytime you can play a deck and give yourself a reason to play a land destruction spell in the main to deal with, maybe not so much in Standard, but look, if you're killing Tron lands, I don't think anybody's going to be too sad.
No.
Except maybe the Tron player. I don't know.
Yeah, one person will be very sad.
Yeah, one person will be extremely
It is a little unfortunate, though, that when the lands are indestructible, I came up against a few opponents who were doing those shenanigans, so womp womp, what you gonna do? Nicely done, Damon. We'll see you in just a few minutes, but Paul, closing thoughts on this Modern deck. What did you think about it?
No, I thought this was a very impressive way to build this deck. At the same time, probably if you're the opponent, probably not a whole lot of fun. But just finding that combination of being able to set your game plan up where you go Vivien into a guaranteed 5-drop into Yorion, which helps you find the Avalanche Rider, and it sequences in a way where you're guaranteed to kill 2 lands that turn. That's huge. And that's going to just win you a whole lot of matches. So I do like that direction. Unfortunately, I think this is probably the deck that was hit the hardest with the recent rules changes. So I personally think this deck is just not going to be built the same way, right? You can't really lean as heavily on the land destruction angle. Sure, you can still put Yorion in this deck, and it can still be a good value deck. But I think that combination is what I think made this deck really, really powerful and really hard to play against. And I think it's still going to be decent, but missing that is going to be a pretty big piece for the success of this deck.
Yep, I can agree there. I do think with Yorion being a little bit more difficult to get hold of, there's going to be quite a few changes in the coming weeks, so let's see what those are. But now, ladies and gentlemen, friends everywhere around the interwebs, it's time to give our boys their card for next week. So, Dan, Damon, David, would you like to find out what your card is that you're going to be building around? It is none other than Riel the Everwise. Initial thoughts. Dan, what do you think about that one?
Wow, well, I'm sure I'm not the only one who, when this card was previewed, I ran to Gatherer and started looking up everything that discards cards in Standard.
Yeah, I
'Cause
did
that is
too.
such a powerful bonus. Every time you discard cards, you get those cards back. I can't wait to see what this card could do.
Yeah, a question for cards like this often is, can you kind of play it in like a value shell where you're just sort of doing normal things and they get really powerful with Riel in play? Or do you kind of want to make it all about Riel and doing, some sort of like ridiculous thing with her ability? So it's going to take some testing to figure out, which one works and which one doesn't.
The card I'm most excited for that my compatriots don't have access to is Street Wraith, where you just play Riel on 3 and immediately have the ability to benefit from her ability before she dies to any number of common removal spells in Modern. And that alone is a pretty good line.
Nice. Alrighty, friends, that is going to do it for this episode of Rogue Refinery. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below what sort of shenanigans you're hoping to see from the Faithless Brewing boys next week with Riel the Everwise. On that note, though, we love you, we leave you. Bye-bye.